Ethan Carter sat in his luxurious office on the 35th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, surrounded by screens displaying real-time financial charts. His career had been built on strategic decisions and a sharp instinct for investments. But that day, everything was crumbling before his eyes. The phone vibrated incessantly on his desk, flooded with messages from investors demanding answers. The sound of notifications echoed like hammer blows in his chest. Beside him, his financial advisor, Mark Reynolds, stood pale, sweating profusely. Mark had insisted on the latest deal, convincing Ethan to go all in on a cryptocurrency that had collapsed within mere hours. "Tell me this is a mistake." Ethan's voice came out hoarse, barely audible. Mark swallowed hard, unable to meet his boss's piercing gaze. "There's no mistake, Ethan. We lost everything. The coin plummeted, the funds vanished. The investors are furious. Some are threatening to sue." Ethan's head spun. He had always been in control of his business, never allowing a misstep to define him. But this wasn't just a mistake. It was an absolute disaster. "How much is left?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Mark hesitated, scanning the papers in front of him as if searching for a miracle. "Nothing. We're in the red, and we need liquidity immediately. If we don't secure funds, your company could be forced to declare bankruptcy in a matter of days." Ethan felt his heart race. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Everything he had built, the years of relentless work, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, had vanished in the blink of an eye. He pushed himself out of his black leather chair, walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, and stared down at the city below. Thousands of people rushed about their lives, completely unaware that, at that very moment, one of New York's wealthiest men was on the verge of losing everything. "How did this happen, Mark? You said this was the investment of the century." His voice was laced with restrained fury. Mark ran his hands through his hair, panicked. The data was solid. The numbers indicated it was going to explode. But fraud was uncovered behind the scenes at the company, and Ethan shut his eyes for a brief second. It all made sense now. This wasn't just a bad investment. He had been deceived. His mind swirled with dark thoughts. How would he tell Charlotte? His fiancée lived in a world of luxury and excess. He could withstand financial ruin, but what about the look of disdain she would give him? The thought clenched his chest even tighter. He turned back to Mark, his eyes cold as ice. "Get out. Now." Mark hesitated. "Ethan, I can try something. Get out." Ethan roared, his voice echoing through the office. Mark gathered the papers with trembling hands and rushed out, leaving Ethan alone, sinking into the darkness of his downfall. Night was falling over New York, bringing with it the certainty that his life would never be the same again. The sharp click of Charlotte's heels echoed through the spacious living room as Ethan walked into the house. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting a diamond earring while smiling at her own reflection. She wore a form-fitting red dress, tailor-made to accentuate her curves. On the console table beside her, a bottle of champagne chilled in an ice bucket, and a designer handbag rested, ready to be taken. Seeing Ethan, she turned to him, her voice light and cheerful. "Love, I'm so glad you're home. We're late, you know?" She grabbed her phone, checking the time. "Come on. The car's already waiting." Ethan remained frozen in the doorway, his face rigid, his expression hollow. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His throat was dry, and the weight of what he had to say crushed his chest. Charlotte frowned, noticing he wasn't dressed. "Ethan, are you okay?" He took a deep breath, ran a hand through his hair, and stared at the floor for a few seconds before finally looking up at her. "We can't go to the party." Charlotte let out a humorless laugh. "What? You're joking, right? It's the event of the year. Everyone's going to be there." Ethan felt his stomach twist. How could he tell her the truth? How could he destroy in just a few words everything she believed she had. But there was no choice. I lost everything. Charlotte's laughter died instantly. What? She blinked, confused. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his confession. We invested in cryptocurrency, what seemed like a solid deal. But it was a scam. We lost every cent. I have nothing left, Charlotte. For a brief moment, silence filled the room. The woman standing before him widened her eyes, and then a bitter laugh escaped her lips. That can't be true. You're just exhausted. This is some kind of test, right? Ethan shook his head. I wish it were, but it's not. Charlotte slammed her phone onto the table, the sharp crack echoing through the room. You're telling me that... She stepped closer, her voice rising. That you, the great Ethan Carter, lost everything? He nodded slowly. Charlotte stood frozen for a few seconds, absorbing his words. Then her face contorted. How could you do this to me? She screamed, her rage erupting. I don't know how to live without money. Ethan. He took a step toward her, but she immediately moved back. Charlotte, I'm so sorry. We'll find a solution together. Together? She let out a scornful laugh. And where exactly am I supposed to cut back? In what part of my life? I've never had to do that. Ethan's eyes welled up, but he held his ground. I know this is hard, but I love you. She crossed her arms, breathing heavily. Love doesn't pay the bills, Ethan. Love doesn't give me the life I deserve. His chest tightened. So that was it then? She didn't care about him, only about what he could provide. After a long silence, Charlotte took a deep breath as if trying to compose herself. Her expression softened, and she reached for his hands. I need some time to think, she said, her voice suddenly sweet. I'll go to the party, have a few drinks, talk to my friends. When I get back, we'll talk about this. Ethan felt a pang of suspicion but simply nodded. All right. Charlotte grabbed her handbag and, without so much as a second glance at him, walked out the door. The moment she slid into the limousine waiting for her, a single thought consumed her mind. I can't lose everything. No way. Charlotte stepped out of the car with the effortless elegance of someone who knew she was being watched. The red dress clung to her body like it was made for her, and the sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor echoed through the grand ballroom in the heart of Manhattan. The atmosphere reeked of exclusivity, towering chandeliers, crystal glasses clinking, and the empty laughter of people who existed only to be seen. She scanned the crowd, her eyes quickly locking onto her target. Richard Lancaster, a real estate tycoon with an obscene fortune and a reputation for never passing up an opportunity. A slow, knowing smile curved Charlotte's lips as she adjusted her hair and walked toward him with the confidence of someone who already knew how the night would end. Charlotte Carter, Richard said as she approached, an intrigued smile playing on his lips. You look absolutely stunning tonight. She returned the smile, leaning in just slightly. You always know the right things to say, Richard. He lifted his whiskey glass toward her. The right words for the right women. Charlotte plucked a champagne flute from a passing waiter's tray and clinked it against his glass. The game was about to begin. And where is your fiancé, that financial market prodigy? Richard asked, studying her with sharp eyes. She sighed dramatically, gazing down at the golden liquid in her glass. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it, and frankly, she bit her lower lip, feigning hesitation before letting out a wistful smile. I'm not sure he'll be my fiancé for much longer. Richard raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Oh, that's unexpected. She leaned in a little closer, as if sharing a dangerous secret. He made a mistake, an unforgivable one. We lost everything. Richard's eyes gleamed with a mix of curiosity and something deeper, a calculated interest. He knew exactly what this woman wanted, and at that moment he also knew he could give it to her. A woman like you shouldn't be left helpless, Richard said. his fingers gliding smoothly over her arm. Charlotte allowed the touch, maintaining her smile. "You've always been a generous man, Richard." The conversation flowed effortlessly between more drinks and exchanged glances. Charlotte laughed at jokes that weren't funny, lightly touched his arm at strategic moments, and made it clear, without ever saying it outright, that she was available. And Richard, a man accustomed to winning, knew this was an opportunity he couldn't afford to pass up. By the end of the night, he pulled her close, locking eyes with her. "Are you alone tonight?" Charlotte held her breath for just a moment, creating an air of rehearsed vulnerability. Then slowly she nodded. "I am." That was all Richard needed. He settled the bill, retrieved his car keys from the valet, and offered her his arm. Charlotte accepted without hesitation. As the car glided through New York's glowing streets, she pulled out her phone and typed the last message Ethan would ever receive from her. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I have a certain standard of living, and if you can't maintain it, we can't be together. I'm not willing to go through this. I wish you luck." She hit send, tossed the phone into her handbag, and gazed out the window, a satisfied smile curling on her lips. Across the city, Ethan picked up his phone with trembling hands. As he read the message, his eyes filled with tears. His mind scrambled for a logical explanation, but the brutal, undeniable truth settled in. Charlotte never loved him. Before continuing, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what you think about Charlotte's actions. A hollow, crushing emptiness took hold of his chest, followed by a dull, seething rage. In a sudden burst of fury, he hurled his whiskey glass against the wall, watching it shatter into hundreds of fragments, just like his life at that moment. The night dragged on, but for him, time had stopped. Charlotte moved on without looking back. And Ethan Carter, the man who had built an empire from nothing, now had to find the strength to rebuild not just his fortune, but himself. Ethan Carter sat on the floor of his vast living room, staring at the shards of glass scattered before him. The sharp scent of whiskey clung to the air, mixing with the suffocating silence of the empty house. He had read and reread Charlotte's message countless times, trying to understand how someone who once claimed to love him could discard him with such ruthless indifference. The hours dragged on. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. His phone rang incessantly, calls from investors, lawyers, reporters. But he didn't answer. That night, his only companion was the searing pain of disappointment. By the time morning light seeped through the half-drawn curtains, Ethan pulled himself off the floor, only to drag his weary body to the bedroom. He shut the curtains and collapsed onto the bed, burying his face in the pillow. The world outside felt distant, irrelevant. Days passed without him noticing. His beard grew thick. The dark circles under his eyes deepened. The phone eventually stopped ringing, or maybe he had muted all the notifications. Stacks of takeout boxes piled up on the floor, and empty liquor bottles cluttered the furniture. In the bathroom, bottles of sleeping pills accumulated, yet even they failed to quiet his restless mind. The only person still entering the house was Emily Hayes, his housekeeper. At first, she simply did her job, cleaned in silence and left without disturbing him. But over time, she began to notice the signs. On the first day, she saw the overflowing trash, filled with fast food wrappers, proof that he wasn't cooking or eating properly. On the second, she noticed the growing pile of unwashed clothes, as if he no longer cared enough to change. By the third, she spotted the bottles of pills and knew something was seriously wrong. And on the seventh day, she made a decision. That morning, Emily stepped into the kitchen, gathered the ingredients she could find, and baked a corn cake, the way her grandmother used to when she wanted to lift her spirits on hard days. She brewed fresh coffee and arranged everything on a tray. Taking a deep breath, she made her way to Ethan's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and the room was completely dark. A heavy mix of alcohol and despair lingered in the air. "Mr. Carter?" she called gently. No response. She hesitated before stepping inside. In the dim light, she could make out his silhouette on the bed, motionless. "May I come in?" This time he answered, his voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "Come in." Emily stepped inside and placed the tray on the nightstand beside the bed. Ethan turned slowly, his eyes heavy and tired, gazing at her. "What is this?" "I didn't ask for anything," he muttered. She offered him a gentle smile. "I know, but I can tell you're not doing well, and I care about you. I made a cake and brewed some fresh coffee. I thought it might help." Ethan frowned. "And what makes you so sure this will cheer me up?" Emily sat on the edge of the bed, smiling again. "Because that's exactly what my grandmother used to do for me when I was feeling down. A warm cake, a fresh cup of coffee, and a good conversation always made my day better." He watched her for a moment, considering telling her to leave. But there was something different about her. Her gesture was sincere, no ulterior motives. The kindness in her eyes disarmed him. With a heavy sigh, he sat up and took a bite of the cake. The soft, warm flavor stirred memories of childhood, of when his mother used to bake for him. A lump formed in his throat, but this time, it wasn't just sadness. It was longing, a comforting nostalgia. Emily quietly started tidying up the room. Ethan observed her, intrigued. "You don't have to do that today," he said, taking a sip of coffee. "Yes, I do," she replied without stopping. "No one can recover in the middle of chaos." Ethan studied Emily closely and realized there was a genuine wisdom in her words, something he hadn't heard in a long time. After spending so many years in a world of appearances and shallow people, it was rare to meet someone who spoke with such depth, and that surprised him. "Thank you for the cake and the coffee. They're delicious," he said, managing a small smile. Emily returned the smile, her voice warm. "I'm glad it brightened your day. I'm sure little by little you'll get better. From what I can see, you're a smart man. No matter what happened, you'll find a way to rise again." Intrigued, Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You know what happened to me?" Emily glanced around and, with a perceptive tone, replied, "Judging by the state of your room and the mess in the house, I'd say your business isn't doing well. And from the absence of high heels and that broken whiskey glass on the floor, I assume your fiancé left." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise. "Are you an analyst?" She let out a soft laugh. "No, I just see things differently." He lowered his head, took a deep breath, and admitted, "You're right. I lost everything, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to get it back." Emily stepped a little closer and spoke with quiet conviction. "Only those who have climbed the mountain know the way. If you reach the top once, the second time will be easier. You just need to clear your thoughts, open the windows, let the light in, get up, leave the fear and sadness behind, and start thinking about how to win it all back. You already know what works and what doesn't in your business. You'll figure it out." Her words hit him like a bolt of clarity. She was right, but who was this woman? How could she speak with such certainty? He looked into her eyes, deeply grateful. "Thank you. You're absolutely right." Emily smiled. "So, can I open the windows now?" Ethan nodded slightly. She pulled back the curtains, unlocked the windows, and let the sunlight flood the room. Instinctively, he pulled the blanket over his head, shielding himself from the sudden brightness, and chuckled. "I feel like a vampire running from the light." Emily laughed along with him and continued tidying up. When she was done, Ethan thanked her once again. Emily left the room, and for the first time in a long while, he felt different. The fresh scent of a clean space, the newfound order in his surroundings, and most of all, that conversation, had brought him an unexpected sense of relief. He took a deep breath. "Shutting myself off like this isn't good for anyone. That woman was an angel, showing up at just the right time." Ethan stood up, took a long shower, shaved, and put on a decent outfit. Then he stepped out of his room and walked toward the garden. He breathed in the fresh air, sat under the shade of a tree, something he hadn't done in a long time, and simply relaxed. The breeze brushed against his face, and he lifted his gaze to the sky. "Mom, you're not here anymore, but somehow you're still looking out for me. That cake, that coffee, they reminded me of your love. I miss you, and I always will." Then, he got up and headed to his office. Sitting at his desk, he opened his notebook and, for a moment, just sat there, reflecting. How could he rebuild? He picked up a pen and started writing. Ideas, plans, strategies, each detail was carefully thought through. He mapped out a logical course, organized his priorities, and structured each step with precision. This time, there would be no room for mistakes. He decided to sell the house. He had already received a generous offer. He would move into a smaller apartment, something more practical for this new phase of his life. He would sell his cars, keeping only one. Every dollar from these sales would be invested wisely, with careful planning and caution. It was a fresh start, and this time he would do everything differently. The next morning, the scent of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the air, and for a moment, Ethan wondered when was the last time he had a normal routine. Getting dressed, he headed downstairs, finding Emily setting a few slices of bread on the table. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." He pulled out a chair and sat down, folding his arms on the table. "Ethan," he corrected. "If I'm starting over, I think I can drop the formalities." Emily raised an eyebrow, surprised, but nodded. "All right, Ethan. Coffee?" He nodded, reaching for a cup. "Looks like you're finding your way back," she said. He let out a quiet chuckle. "Who would have thought I'd need a housekeeper to remind me of who I am?" Emily shrugged, a playful sparkle in her eyes. "Who said I'm just a housekeeper?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "Aren't you? I'm a woman who sees the world differently," she said, picking up her own cup of coffee. "And I know that everyone deserves a second chance, including you." He fell silent for a moment. For the first time, he felt something new toward Emily, something beyond gratitude. But now wasn't the time for that. First, he had to rebuild his life. Ethan Carter spent the morning in his office, reviewing old documents and notes. He flipped through notebooks filled with strategies that had once seemed distant but now made sense again. He had built an empire before. He could do it again. All he needed was intelligence and patience. He picked up the phone and called his real estate agent. "Daniel, it's me. Is the offer for my house still on the table?" There was a brief pause on the other end, as if the man was surprised to finally hear Ethan's voice after weeks of silence. "Ethan, yes, the offer is still valid. The buyer is eager. He and his wife love the property." Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, and took a deep breath. "I'll take it. Let's close the deal as soon as possible." Daniel couldn't hide his enthusiasm. "Great decision. I'll start the process today." Ethan hung up and looked around the room. This house represented a chapter that needed to be closed. Every wall, every piece of furniture still carried the weight of a past that no longer existed. He got up and walked to the window, gazing out at the grand New York skyline. But this time, he didn't feel that crushing emptiness. He felt possibility. With a renewed sense of purpose, he grabbed his phone and called an old business associate, Matthew Hayes, a tech investor he knew still trusted his instincts. "Ethan Carter," Matthew answered, his tone laced with surprise. "I thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth." "Let's just say I took some time to reevaluate things," Ethan replied. "But I'm back." Matthew chuckled. "And what's the plan?" A small smile played on Ethan's lips. "I have a few ideas. I want to set up a meeting with you and a select group of investors. I've got a new project to pitch." "That's interesting," Matthew mused. "A lot of people still see you as a business genius, Ethan. But there are also plenty who think you're finished." Ethan's grip tightened around the phone. Then I guess it's time to prove them wrong. There was a brief pause before Matthew responded. I'm in. Let's set up the meeting. After hanging up, Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling a rush of adrenaline he hadn't experienced in a long time. He wasn't completely back yet, but this was his first major step forward. When he stepped out of his office, he found Emily in the kitchen, wiping down the counter. She looked up at him, noticing something different in his expression. Judging by that look on your face, I'd say you have good news. Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee before answering. The house is sold. I'm moving into a smaller, more practical apartment, and I've scheduled a meeting with investors. She smiled, pleased. Looks like you're taking back control of your life. He took a sip of coffee, studying her for a moment before speaking. If I am, I owe a lot of it to you. Emily shrugged, as if it were nothing. I just did what anyone would do. Ethan let out a quiet laugh. No, Emily, what you did, not everyone would have. They exchanged a quiet look. Ethan knew his journey was only just beginning, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path. In the days that followed, Ethan Carter threw himself into his new decisions. The house was in the process of being sold. The cars had already been negotiated, and his meeting with investors was scheduled for the following week. Everything was happening fast, but in a controlled manner, just the way he liked it. For the first time since his downfall, he felt the chaos around him beginning to settle. That morning, Ethan walked downstairs expecting to find Emily in the kitchen, as had become routine in recent days. He had grown accustomed to her quiet yet comforting presence. But this time, the house was empty. He frowned. Emily? No answer. Crossing the living room, he spotted another woman dusting the shelves. A middle-aged woman he had never seen before. Who are you? He asked, confused. The woman turned with a professional demeanor. I'm Angela, sir. I work for the cleaning company that provides service here. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Where's Emily? The woman hesitated. As far as I know, she was dismissed. A chill ran down his spine. Dismissed? Who did that? Angela paused for a moment before answering. The company received an order to replace her. I was just sent here. Ethan stood frozen. Who had given that order? He hadn't requested anything. His mind began racing in 1,000 directions. And where is she now? I don't know, sir. I'm new to the company, and I don't know her well. Ethan grabbed his phone, his jaw clenched, and called the cleaning company. After several minutes on hold, a receptionist finally answered. This is Ethan Carter. I need to talk about one of your employees, Emily Hayes. On the other end, the receptionist hesitated. Mr. Carter, I'm sorry, but we cannot disclose information about our employees. Ethan's patience snapped. Listen, I never requested her dismissal. I just want to know where I can find her. I'm afraid we can't provide that information, sir. He gripped the phone tightly, his heartbeat speeding up. Fine. Then tell me this. Why was she fired? The receptionist went silent for a moment before responding. The system lists it as a disciplinary dismissal. A surge of anger rushed through Ethan's chest. What does that mean? It simply indicates a violation of company policy, sir. That made no sense. Ethan knew Emily wouldn't have done anything wrong. Something about this situation felt off. Thank you, he said curtly before hanging up. If the company wouldn't give him answers, he would have to find them himself. He turned back to Angela, doing his best to keep his tone calm but firm. Look, I owe Emily some money. One day I didn't have cash to pay the delivery guy, and she lent me $50. Today I promised to pay her back, and I know that amount makes a difference for her at the end of the month. Could you help me get her number? I'd like to call and ask her to come pick up the money. Angela's expression softened. She understood that $50 might seem insignificant to some, but for someone earning a modest wage, it could mean a lot. Wanting to help, she sent a message to a more senior colleague at the company. who quickly retrieved Emily's full name and contact information. Ethan thanked Angela, and as soon as she left, he grabbed his phone and dialed. The call rang several times, but no one answered. He tried again a few hours later, and this time an older voice picked up. "Hello?" The woman on the other end said, "Good afternoon. My name is Ethan. I need to speak with Emily. Is she available?" There was a brief pause before the response. "I'm sorry. Emily is in the hospital. She's not doing well." Ethan frowned, a tightness forming in his chest. The hospital? What happened? She had a panic attack after being fired for no reason. She's on medication and needs rest to recover. Concern gripped him. "I need to see her. It's urgent. Can I visit?" Emily's mother, sensing the urgency in his voice, sighed before replying. "Of course, I'll send you the address." As soon as the call ended, Ethan grabbed his car keys and drove straight to the hospital. Upon arrival, he was directed to Emily's room, where he found her mother sitting beside the bed. He introduced himself politely. "My name is Ethan. Emily was an angel to me, and I needed to come thank her in person." Emily's mother gave him a gentle smile. "That's what she lives for, helping as many people as she can. She has such a kind heart, always so generous with everyone, except herself." Ethan looked at Emily, who was sleeping peacefully, then turned back to her mother, encouraging her to continue. "What exactly happened? Why was she fired?" The woman sighed, lowering her gaze. "A coworker of hers stole some cleaning supplies from the company. She said she was struggling and couldn't afford to buy them. The boss found out, and Emily, so the woman wouldn't lose her job, since she has a small child to support, took the blame. She ended up getting fired." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He admired Emily's courage and generosity even more. "That's heartbreaking, but I promise things will get better for her." Emily's mother gave him an emotional smile. "Thank you for saying that." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Would you mind keeping an eye on her for a few hours? I need to go home, take a shower, grab some clothes, and get something to eat before coming back." Ethan nodded without hesitation. "Of course, take your time. I'll stay here until you return." She thanked him with a tight hug. Ethan, slightly surprised, returned it awkwardly. Once she left, he pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat there, watching Emily, realizing that this woman had changed his life in ways he never could have imagined. Ethan settled into the armchair beside her bed, observing her peaceful face. She looked so serene, so beautiful. It was hard to believe that someone so selfless had to endure so much suffering. A few minutes passed before she began to stir. Still drowsy, she blinked a few times, her brow furrowing as she noticed him sitting there. "What happened?" she asked, her voice hoarse from sleep. "Why are you here?" Ethan gently took her hand in his and smiled. "Don't worry. I needed to come and thank you. When I arrived, you were asleep, so I spoke with your mother. She needed to freshen up and pick up some things for you, and I told her I'd stay and keep an eye on you until she got back. It's the least I can do." Emily gave him a small, sleepy smile, still trying to process everything. "But why?" He looked into her eyes, his expression sincere. "Because you were the one who got me out of bed and made me fight again." Emily looked away for a brief moment, slightly embarrassed, then spoke with quiet humility. "Come on. Helping others is the most special thing we can do, and it should be natural for everyone." Ethan shook his head. "But it's not, and that's exactly why you're special." She looked at him curiously, and he continued. "I heard you were fired unfairly." Emily sighed and shrugged. "Yeah, sometimes helping others comes at a high price." Ethan gave her a small smile. "I think everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He leaned in just a little closer, his voice firm. "I mean that I have an offer for you. I urgently need an assistant. I'm rebuilding, and I need someone like you by my side. Someone loyal, kind, who knows exactly what to say at the right time. And, of course, someone who makes the best cake and coffee in the world. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. "Are you serious?" Ethan nodded. "Completely serious. I need you by my side." A different kind of light appeared in her eyes. Without thinking twice, Emily stretched out her arms and pulled him into a tight hug. Ethan returned the embrace, feeling deep in his chest that he had found the right person to stand beside him. "Thank you," she whispered. They stayed there, talking, feeling the connection between them grow, until Emily's mother returned to the room. The days passed quickly after Emily was discharged from the hospital. Ethan made a point of accompanying her home, ensuring she was settled in before she officially started her new job. For her, it was an unexpected fresh start. For him, it was a new opportunity to build something from the ground up, but this time with someone who truly believed in him. On the morning of her first day at work, Emily arrived at Ethan's new apartment with impeccable punctuality. He had traded his opulent mansion for a more discreet and functional space, something that better aligned with the mindset he was developing. She paused at the entrance, taking in the new residence. It was elegant but without excess. A modern apartment with glass-paneled walls offering a breathtaking view of the city. Before she could knock, Ethan opened the door. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said with a smile. He crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow. "I thought we were past the formalities." Emily chuckled. "Old habit, but okay, Ethan." He stepped aside to let her in, gesturing toward the well-organized space. A desk was covered in documents, and fresh coffee was already brewed. "Hope you're ready for an intense day," he said, pouring her a cup. Emily took the cup and nodded. "I was born ready." And with that, the work began. Over the next few days, Ethan and Emily immersed themselves in meetings, strategies, and financial reviews. Ethan knew he needed a new angle to regain investors' trust. Emily, for her part, proved to be an invaluable asset. Her practical insight and ability to read people helped Ethan avoid pitfalls he hadn't seen before. "You trust the numbers too much," she remarked one day as they reviewed a presentation. He looked up at her. "And that's a problem?" "Not always. But business is built on people, not just graphs. If you want investors to trust you again, you need to convince them with more than just financial projections." Ethan fell silent for a moment. She was right again. He realized that, before, he had been so focused on numbers and statistics that he had overlooked the importance of the human factor. "You should talk more," he said with a smile. She shrugged. "I speak when I know someone is listening." Her response made Ethan laugh. For the first time in months, he wasn't just feeling the pressure of rebuilding his fortune. He was actually enjoying the process. As the days passed, their dynamic became increasingly natural. Emily wasn't just an efficient assistant. She was someone who challenged him, who made him reflect, who helped him see things he had once ignored. Ethan realized that his admiration for her was growing each day. He liked the way she paid attention to details, how she always had a sharp response, and most of all, how her presence made everything feel lighter. Even Emily started to notice the difference. "You're changing," she commented one day while organizing some contracts. Ethan glanced at her, intrigued. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "You used to be tougher, more distant. Now you seem more human." He chuckled, shaking his head. "And is that a good or a bad thing?" "Depends. For business, it might be a challenge. For the people around you, it's a gift." He went quiet for a moment, letting her words sink in. Emily didn't know it, but she was the reason for that change. 3 months later, Ethan made his grand return to the market. With Emily's help, he gathered investors and presented an innovative project that immediately caught the industry's attention. At the end of the presentation, his old colleague, Matthew Hayes, approached him. "You're back in full force, Ethan. But tell me, who's your new assistant?" Ethan turned to look at Emily, who was engaged in conversation with other investors. She was smiling, confident, and completely at ease in that environment. He smiled. The best decision I ever made. And in that moment, he realized that his new beginning wasn't just about business. It was about her. 3 months after his downfall, Ethan Carter was back at the top. His new venture was already attracting investors, and the meetings were increasingly promising. He had rebuilt his fortune in record time, but this time it was different. No empty extravagance, no reliance on appearances. Everything was done with intelligence, caution, and, most importantly, with Emily's help. That morning, as they reviewed contracts in his apartment office, Ethan glanced at Emily and realized he needed to thank her in a special way. "Do you have plans for tonight?" he asked casually. Emily looked up, surprised by the question. "No." "Why?" Ethan smiled. "Then allow me the honor of taking you to dinner. I want to celebrate our success." She hesitated for a moment before smiling. "All right, but only if it's a real dinner. No business talk." Ethan chuckled. "Deal." At 8 o'clock, Ethan sat in a sophisticated restaurant in the heart of New York, waiting anxiously. When Emily arrived, he felt his breath hitch for a moment. She was stunning in a deep blue dress that highlighted her eyes, and her smile lit up the entire room. "Wow!" he blurted out before he could stop himself. Emily let out a soft laugh. "Is that a good sign?" "It's a sign that I'm speechless." They took their seats, and the evening unfolded effortlessly. For the first time, Ethan wasn't thinking about investments, charts, or strategic decisions. He was just enjoying her company. Emily's laughter was like a pleasant melody, and Ethan found himself noticing the little details. The way she absent-mindedly played with her hair, the sparkle in her eyes when she spoke about something she was passionate about, the spontaneous way she laughed at his jokes. When dessert was served, Ethan decided it was the right moment. "Emily?" he began, reaching across the table to take her hand. She looked at him, curiosity flickering in her eyes, slightly surprised by the gesture. "Yes." He took a deep breath. "I've never met anyone like you. From the moment you came into my life, everything changed. You helped me rebuild, not just financially, but as a person." Emily lowered her gaze, visibly moved. "Ethan," but before she could say another word, an unwelcome voice shattered the moment. "Wow, fancy seeing you here." Ethan's body tensed the instant he recognized the voice. "Charlotte." She approached the table, completely ignoring Emily. Impeccable as always, she carried herself with the same elegance, but something was different. Maybe it was the way her once arrogant gaze now held a flicker of regret. "I thought I'd never see you again, Ethan. I heard you rebuilt your fortune. I always knew you were a genius." Emily subtly pulled back, giving him space to handle the situation. But Ethan didn't hesitate. "Charlotte, we're in the middle of dinner." She ignored the hint and leaned in slightly closer. "Did you miss me?" And then, without warning, she bent down and tried to kiss him. Emily averted her gaze, visibly uncomfortable. But before she had to react, Ethan firmly pushed Charlotte away. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he asked, incredulous. Charlotte smiled, still trying to maintain control of the situation. "I'm just reminiscing," Charlotte said, her voice laced with feigned innocence. Ethan let out a dry, ironic laugh. "Do you have selective memory, Charlotte? You abandoned me at the worst moment of my life." She crossed her arms, tilting her chin up. "I made a mistake, but look at us now. You're back on top. We could have it all again." Ethan turned to Emily. She didn't say a word, but her expression spoke volumes. And in that moment, he realized that Charlotte belonged to a past he would never return to. He faced his ex-fiancée with unwavering resolve. "Charlotte, you don't get it. What I want now isn't money or status. I want real people by my side." Charlotte blinked, caught off guard. "And her," he gestured toward Emily. "She is the most real person I've ever met." Emily's eyes widened, but before she could say anything, Ethan stood up. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a dinner to finish." Charlotte huffed in frustration and stormed out of the restaurant. Ethan let out a deep breath before turning back to Emily. "I'm so sorry about that." Still surprised, Emily let out a quiet laugh. "Well, that was unexpected." Ethan reached for her hand again, locking eyes with her. "I won't let that moment ruin what I was about to say. So, I'm going to continue." Emily, a bit shy but intrigued, smiled. "Okay, I'm listening." Ethan gathered his courage and went on. "You stole my heart, Emily. I'm completely in love with you. With your kindness, your loyalty, and the way you see the world. You made me want to be a better man." Emily blinked, stunned. "Ethan," he gently squeezed her hand. "I need to know. Will you be my girlfriend?" At that moment, a waiter discreetly approached with a bouquet of flowers, handing them to Emily. She took the flowers, still in shock, but then, slowly, a radiant smile spread across her face. "I will." Ethan grinned and, without thinking, pulled her in for a soft, sincere kiss. In that instant, he knew everything he had been through had led him here, to her. And this time, he was certain it was real love. Time passed like a whisper, and Ethan Carter's life was never the same. He didn't just rebuild his fortune. He found something he never imagined he was capable of having: true love. His relationship with Emily blossomed in a way that was both natural and intense. She wasn't just his girlfriend. She was his partner, his confidant, his best friend. Ethan's world, once driven by ambition and status, now revolved around simple moments: morning coffees together, late-night laughter over silly things on the couch. His business thrived more than ever. With the human perspective that Emily brought to his investments, Ethan adopted a new approach and became a different kind of businessman, more approachable, more conscious, and, above all, happier. 1 year after that night at the restaurant, Ethan and Emily traveled to Santorini, Greece, a place she had always dreamed of visiting. During a seaside dinner under a sky full of stars, Ethan took her hand and took a deep breath. "Do you remember when I told you that you taught me to see the world differently?" he asked. Emily smiled, intrigued. "I remember." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing a simple yet elegant ring, filled with meaning. "I see the world in a new way because you're in it, and I never want to imagine a future without you." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, will you marry me?" She laughed through her tears, not hesitating for a second. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a passionate kiss, as applause from strangers echoed through the restaurant. A few months later, Ethan and Emily were married in an intimate, elegant ceremony. Nothing extravagant, just the people who truly mattered. Unlike what it would have been in his superficial past, this time, every detail held meaning. Shortly after, during a trip to the Bahamas, Emily had a surprise prepared for Ethan. With a mysterious smile, she handed him a small envelope. He opened it, and as he read the contents, he was speechless. You're pregnant?" he asked, looking into her eyes. Emily nodded, overwhelmed with emotion. "Yes." Ethan felt his heart race, a wave of emotion flooding over him like never before. He pulled her into a tight embrace, laughing and crying all at once. "This is the best news of my life." Emily laughed, wiping away a tear. "Well, then get ready. Our adventure is just beginning." And in that moment, Ethan Carter knew that despite once losing everything, he had gained something infinitely greater: true love, a family, and a new reason to live. He had, at last, found what truly mattered. If you enjoyed this video, let us know in the comments. Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to subscribe. A big hug, and see you in the next video.